A few days ago, I penned an irritated tweet, but also I'm trying to make a point. I've essentially been banned from Twitter as a consequence. I say banned, although technically I have been suspended.
In a time where Pride Month is celebrated worldwide and gender identities are a hot topic of debate, Peterson's tweet about Ellen Page, now known as Elliot Page, and the idea of pride caused a massive controversy. He stood his ground, sparking a heated discussion on free speech and woke culture. How did one tweet cause such an uproar, and what does it say about today's society? Jordan Peterson is a name you'll likely recognize if you follow modern cultural debates. He's a well-known psychologist, a best-selling author, and a vocal critic of woke culture. His rise to fame began when he publicly opposed a Canadian bill that sought to enforce the use of specific gender pronouns, a stance that quickly propelled him into the spotlight.
But the suspension will not be lifted unless I delete the hateful tweet in question, and I would rather die than do that. Remember when pride was a sin?
Peterson's book, 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos, became a worldwide hit. It's filled with practical advice and deep philosophical ideas, which is why it struck a chord with so many people. Peterson has a talent for simplifying complex topics, whether it's about personal responsibility, finding meaning, or the risks of ideological thinking. Now, let's dive into the tweet that caused such a commotion. That tweet sent Twitter into a frenzy, and Peterson was suspended. The reason? His tweet was labeled as hateful behavior.
The response from Twitter, violating our rules against hateful conduct. You may not promote violence against, threaten, or harass other people on the basis of race, ethnicity, national origin, sexual orientation, gender, gender identity, religious affiliation, age, disability, or serious disease. It is clearly the case that I did not.
Peterson's tweet addressed a range of contentious issues. First, he referred to pride as a sin. Traditionally, pride has been categorized as one of the 7 deadly sins in Christian theology. Peterson aimed to illustrate how the understanding of pride has transformed, particularly with the emergence of Pride Month, which honors LGBTQ+ identities. He also mentioned Elliot Page using the name Ellen Page, a practice referred to as dead naming. This action is highly debated in woke circles, as it is seen as invalidating someone's gender identity. Peterson further labeled the doctor who conducted Page's surgery as criminal, comparing gender transition surgeries to unethical medical practices from the past. Twitter's response was swift, as they pointed to their policies against promoting violence or harassing individuals based on their identity. However, Peterson contended that his tweet did not threaten or incite violence. He regarded it as a factual statement and a form of free speech. For Peterson and his supporters, this incident exemplifies the overreach of woke culture. They perceive it as an effort to regulate language and enforce ideological conformity. Peterson's refusal to retract the tweet, along with his critique of the woke moralists who demand such actions, underscores his ongoing struggle against what he views as an authoritarian movement to control thought and expression.
What I did wrong, if I am required to acknowledge that my tweet violated the Twitter rules. What rules, you sons of bitches? Exactly. Precisely.
Do you recall when pride was viewed as a sin? This isn't merely a throwaway comment. In Christian theology, pride has historically been classified as one of the 7 deadly sins. It ranks alongside wrath, greed, sloth, envy, gluttony, and lust. In this sense, pride isn't about feeling good about yourself. It relates more to arrogance and an exaggerated self-importance. This inflated sense of self can result in numerous moral and ethical pitfalls.
Old rules, applicable even a decade ago, pride was a sin and had been recognized as perhaps the cardinal sin for thousands of years previously. It still might be regarded as unacceptable.
Peterson's argument highlights how the concept of pride has been completely redefined. Pride Month now celebrates LGBTQ+ identities, marking a significant cultural shift. For Peterson, this change represents a broader transformation where what was once seen as a vice is now viewed as a virtue. This statement serves to provoke thought and challenge existing societal norms regarding the evolution of values. He also mentions Ellen Page, now known as Elliot Page. By referring to Page as Ellen, Peterson engages in what is termed dead naming. In woke culture, dead naming is viewed as disrespectful and invalidating of an individual's gender identity. It's perceived as denying the reality of a person's transition and can be particularly hurtful to those who have gone through it. Nevertheless, Peterson uses Page's former name to emphasize the cultural and linguistic changes surrounding gender identity. By calling Elliot Page Ellen, he contests the expectation to conform to these new norms. He believes this expectation infringes on free speech and personal beliefs.
To take pride in, and so what I said was merely a fact. Next phrase to interrogate. And Ellen Page. Now, why did I stop there? Because in all likelihood, it was this seemingly innocuous phrase, including the name of a well-known actress. There, I'm in trouble again.
Twitter's decision to suspend Peterson represented their effort to enforce community guidelines. They perceived his comments regarding pride and Ellen Page, now known as Elliot Page, as harmful and misaligned with their policies. This action is part of Twitter's broader mission to cultivate a platform they believe is secure and respectful for all users. The backlash from the public was immediate and intense. Activists and media personalities quickly denounced Peterson, labeling him as transphobic and accusing him of disseminating hate speech. The term dead naming was frequently mentioned, with critics arguing that by referring to Elliot Page by his former name, Peterson was intentionally showing disrespect toward Page's gender identity. Media outlets extensively covered the incident, often framing Peterson's tweet as part of a larger trend of his controversial statements over time. For many within the woke community, this incident was yet another instance of Peterson's refusal to acknowledge and honor the experiences of marginalized groups.
Really the sex that everyone knew them by previously, and in the case of Ellen/Elliot, that millions of people recognized and knew. So I should have either called him, her, they, Elliot, instead of Ellen, although as we will discover, that would have made it impossible for me to say what I wanted to and need to say.
In contrast, Peterson's supporters came to his defense. They argued that his suspension represented an infringement on free speech and illustrated the excesses of woke culture. For them, Peterson was simply voicing his opinions, and penalizing him for that was viewed as censorship. Peterson refused to back down. He chose not to delete the tweet, which meant his suspension stayed in effect. In his response, he made it clear that he did not think he had breached any guidelines. He contended that he wasn't inciting violence or making threats, but rather raising a legitimate issue concerning pride, gender identity, and the ethics of specific medical practices. In a video response, he dissected Twitter's policies, pointing out what he saw as inconsistencies and overreach. He questioned why mentioning historical truths or offering critical viewpoints should be labeled as hateful. Peterson's overarching critique was that Twitter, and by extension woke culture, sought to regulate what individuals are allowed to express. He viewed this as a perilous movement toward authoritarianism, where opposing viewpoints are silenced rather than debated.
Then why was it necessary to have the mastectomy? And how could those I am writing to make sense of what I was saying if it was his breasts that were removed? But I don't believe it is either merely picayune or inappropriate to point out that Ellen/Elliot, who is quite a good actor/actress,
Peterson contends that the dangers of this woke authoritarianism stem from its intolerance for dissent. Those who disagree with the woke narrative are often labeled as bigots, transphobes, or worse. This creates a climate of fear, discouraging people from voicing their true opinions. Instead of fostering open conversations, it enforces rigid ideological conformity. To Peterson, this signifies a serious threat to individual liberty and democratic ideals. A significant element of Peterson's critique revolves around the tension between moral relativism and traditional virtues. Woke ideology often embraces moral relativism, the belief that there are no universal moral truths. In this perspective, everything is seen as relative and subjective, where concepts of right and wrong are determined by individual viewpoints and cultural contexts.
I must say that I've had some post-coital, so to speak, regrets about that phrase. It is clearly the case that the surgical operation performed by the butchers who butchered Elliot/Ellen
Conversely, Peterson supports classical virtues. He emphasizes fundamental principles such as courage, honesty, responsibility, and humility. He asserts that these virtues are vital for both societal function and personal well-being. In his perspective, moral relativism undermines these virtues by suggesting that anything is permissible if it aligns with current progressive ideals. For example, Peterson views the celebration of pride as a virtue as a shift away from traditional beliefs that considered pride a sin. He contends that this trend indicates a broader tendency to overlook established moral frameworks in favor of a more fluid and, in his view, less stable set of values. According to him, this leads to confusion and a lack of clear guidance for individuals on how to live a meaningful and virtuous life. What do you think about this? Share your thoughts in the comments below.